Alright, welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm going to attempt to go over the modes, which can be pretty confusing. It took me a while to understand it, and the way it's explained a lot can be very confusing to a lot of people. And the reason being is it's kind of difficult to explain in theory, but when you use it, that's the only way the light bulb's going to come on. You can sit there and think about it and do whatever you want. When you actually play and you see how it works, the light bulb will come on. So the idea of this lesson is to try to help that light bulb go off for some people and to save them some time and understand exactly what this is. So for this lesson, I'm just going to go over G major, and I'm going to show you how the modes are derived. And I'm going to do that I don't want to get too deep into theory here. I want to get into some practical application, because that's really the way it goes off. But you should know the G major scale. If you don't, like starting from the 3rd fret, 6th string G. That's like the standard G major scale. If you don't know that, you have to learn that. Get that down, play it in all 12 keys until it's embedded in your head. Because that's going to end up being one of the positions. There are going to be 7 positions, or patterns, I should say. They're the same 7 patterns, and it's a lot easier than what I at least thought it was. Once I figured it out, I was like, oh my god, that's it? You gotta be kidding me. So, the important part to note when you're trying to learn the modes is, I'm gonna have to get into a little bit of theory here, but just bear with me, is each degree of the major scale represents what they call a mode. The 2nd degree of the major scale is the Dorian, Phrygian, Locrian, Mixolydian. I'm sorry, not Locrian, Lydian, Mixolydian, and then it goes to Aeolian, and then it goes to Locrian, and back to the tonic, the root, the Ionian is the proper term for it. So, and I want to take the 2nd degree of the major scale. And the way I learned it was, I was really into Carlos Santana way back in the day. I just liked the way he played and he sounded. He was melodic, his vibrato and his tone, everything. I liked it. He just kind of like struck a chord with me musically. So I just liked listening to Carlos play. And I found out that he used this thing called the Dorian scale, or the Dorian Mode. I had no clue what that was. Well, you know, I played pentatonics, and, you know, I would use the flat 5, and, you know, I'd go half steps into the roots, the 3rds, the 7ths, the 5ths, you know, and that's the way I pretty much was learning how to play the guitar, and I think that's basically where almost everybody learns how to play the guitar. But this thing called modes, I had no clue. So I'm going to show you the Dorian Mode, and I'm going to show you some things about the Dorian Mode that you'll see can be transposed to all the modes, really. And once you learn the Dorian Mode, you pretty much learn them all. So the Dorian Mode, the same notes from the G major scale are in the A Dorian scale. The same notes. The pattern. Okay, so the A Dorian scale. There should be a fret chart up there for you. And it's only going to span from the 4th to the 7th fret. Or I'm sorry, the 8th fret. 4th to the 8th fret. Learn this pattern. It's the Dorian Mode. That's all you really need to know. Now, the question becomes, well, you're playing under an A minor 7 chord, for example. Let's say you're in the key of G major. You're playing under an A minor 7 chord, and you can use that fingering there. And that's fine. But what happens when it changes chords? Well, if it goes to, let's say, a D major, well, most most of the time you're going to go up to the 7th fret and you're going to play that. But you can stay right where you're at, that same pattern in A Dorian for a D major. Same exact pattern. The only thing that's going to change, and this is important, is the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th. That's the trick, really. I mean, the patterns, I'll show you, they're easy. They're no problem. The trick is, number one, knowing all the notes on the fretboard, right? The root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th of the chord that you're playing under. Because when it goes to D major, you're not going to, even though you're going to be using the same pattern, the same roadmap, you're going to want to target different notes. You're going to want to target the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th of the D chord. But the pattern is going to stay the same. The only difference is you're going to be targeting different notes. Now, I mean, and any chord in the key of G can change, and you can still stay in the same position, the same pattern, but you have to know the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and 7th of the chords that are passing by. In other words, if it went to a G chord, this right here is a G major pattern in the 5th position. It'd be like considered position number 2 because it's the 2nd degree of the major scale. It's also known as A Dorian, which you can play under an A minor 7 chord, right? So this is where the confusing part comes in. The way to clear all that up is to know the notes. You know, that's the easiest way to do it, because once you learn the notes, and even if you don't know the notes, you can do it, because you can figure out where the root, 5th, or the 3rd, 5th, and 7th are in the pattern, and then learn where your bends are and things like that. That's the best way of doing it. If you don't know the notes, I mean, that's the only way I think you can do it. But if you know the notes and you know the chords, it's so much easier, because now you're just not looking at you can see the scale pattern, but you're looking inside the pattern for, you know, your D major arpeggio. You're targeting the key notes, you know, under that chord. But the point is, it can stay the same. So let me just play a real quick example here, and this is just going to be an A minor 7 to G, or A minor 7 to D7 progression, and I'm going to stay in this one position here as the chords change. There's only 2 chords. When you're playing in that one position, you notice I was targeting the chords as they were going by, the notes, and just, you know, improvising whatever come off the top of my head and focusing on like the bends, because when you're playing in that situation, you're kind of limited. You know, you normally won't stay in one position when you're soloing. You're going to be moving around the neck. But this is just a good exercise to get you so that you can see that you're thinking key center more than you're thinking modes, and you're thinking chord tones more than you're thinking modes, if that makes any sense. It's a lot easier that way, I think it is. I mean, I don't want to be, oh, I'm going to play B Phrygian, and then I'm going to go play A Dorian, then I'm going to play G Ionian. I mean, I don't want to think like that. I want to think as little as possible and just play. And try to play what's in my head and transfer it to my fretboard. That's the ultimate goal, I think. So So that's you can lay down any simple progression, and you can lay a 2-5-1 in G major, and just stay in one position, and follow and outline the chords. Learn the arpeggios inside that Dorian shape for A minor 7 or A minor or what it, you know, you can use A minor. Like here, I'll give a good example of things that can get confusing. It was confusing for me. If you're playing under a progression, let's use right, everybody knows that D, C, and G. Now you say, well, it's in a key of D. Well, technically, it's in a key of D mixolydian. You can think of it that way, or you can think of it as in the key of D, or G. I'm sorry. It's really not in the key of D. If you're playing the solo, you're not going to be playing the key of D. D major, because you're going to be using a C sharp, and you don't want to use that C sharp. You want to use the flat 7, which is the C, because that's the key center. The key center is actually G, not D. So so if somebody's playing a D chord and you're playing a Dorian, or not a Dorian, but the pattern here at the 5th fret, you're actually playing, you're implying a D7 chord. You know, it doesn't have to, you don't have to, the rhythm guitar doesn't have to be playing a D7. You can just be playing a regular D. But as you're improvising and soloing, you're hitting that C. You're implying a D7 chord. Same thing, Sweet Home Alabama, during a solo. D mixolydian. You know, you're implying a D7 chord there. And the bass line's probably doing the same things. It is a D7 chord when you think about it, but you don't have to play that 7th. If somebody played a G7 flat 5 or something, you could just play a G7. You don't have to play the flat 5. And this is where it gets a little confusing. But if you practice playing over just that A minor 7 D7, or any chord progression in a key of G or any key, and playing in one position and outlining and targeting the notes of the chord, you know, your ear, well, you'll hear it. And then all of a sudden, if you're playing, you're thinking, you know, G major, you're not thinking A Dorian, and you know, you got the pattern all down the fretboard here. All you're looking at is, as the chord changes, you're looking at the chords. You know, the triads, you're looking at the shapes. You're looking at the shapes of the patterns also. You're looking at bends. You're not thinking A Dorian. You know, you're thinking A minor 7. You know, you're thinking A, E, G. I mean, you're focusing on the notes, the tones of the chords. If the chord, you know, if it went to G, stay in the same position. It doesn't matter, any of the chords in the key of G major, you can play in this one position. And like I said, the only thing that'll change is the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th. Okay, one thing I want to add on this lesson is, you know, I really was emphasizing a lot on the root, the 3rd, 5th, and 7th, because I think it's important. You don't want to get into the pattern of, you'll see some guitar players, it's like scalar type playing. And if you're playing real fast, that you can get away with that, because you're just blurring right through the scale. You're hitting all the notes along with a bunch of other notes. But I wanted to point out a pentatonic scale, which I'm sure everybody knows. When you look at a pentatonic scale, if you look at that D Dorian pattern, if you just took the pentatonic out of that shape, you'll notice the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th, they're all there. I mean, that's why the pentatonic works. The notes that, the other 2 notes in the scale, the 2nd and the 4th, they're like, I don't know, I consider them like kind of like neutral notes. The 2nd in G major is an A. The 2nd in G minor is an A. The 2nd G dominant is an A. The 4th, the same. That's why they call it a perfect 4th. They're neutral notes. You can play those notes if you're playing under major, minor, or dominant. So what you have is the root, the third, the fifth, and the seventh, and two neutral notes. It's a can't miss scale. That's why everybody uses it. That's why they work. But if you apply that same idea to the Dorian scale, or any scale, you'll find that you're playing. It'll sound more melodic. I mean, for improvising, I couldn't improvise any other way, and be comfortable anyway. Especially if you're sitting down and you're writing a guitar solo, you would probably do that. You would target the root, the third, fifth, and the seventh. Try to come up with melodic ideas around those notes because they're the notes. And it's also important to note that these notes, the root, third, fifth, and seventh, they're sound. Sorry about that. My camera decided to stop working. But the tones, they're notes. The root, third, fifth, and seventh, they're just not numbers. They're tones, and they sound a certain way under the chords. The third sounds a certain way. The fifth, I mean, I guess everybody probably hears it differently, but it's important to recognize that they're not numbers like in tab and things like that. Like they're notes. They're part of chords. You know, they're a good example is a guitar player, Bruno, was a phenomenal jazz player, and not only that, he's just a phenomenal guitar player in general. The guy, just his knowledge of the instrument is unbelievable, and he described it as a table and four legs. The root, third, fifth, and seventh are the legs of the table. The tabletop is the chord, and those legs hold up the chord, the tabletop. And it's a great way of looking at it, and it makes a whole lot of sense. So you definitely want to focus in on, when you're improvising, focus in on those tones. That's why the pentatonics work. That's why the Dorian can work. That's why the Phrygian mode can work, the Mixolydian, etc., etc. If you focus in on the tones of the chords that are passing by. Now I know this might not be easy, because depending on where you're at with the guitar, you may not know all that, and that's fine. But if you practice in one position and learn the notes until you get it down, until you know it, when you move up to the next position, and in the next lesson, I'm going to be going to the Phrygian mode, or the Phrygian pattern, I like to think of it as, and play in just that one position in a progression in G major. And you'll see it's the exact same thing that you approach that you did with the Dorian. And then what you do is you connect the Phrygian and the Dorian mode together, and all of a sudden you got a whole lot to work with. And I'm not even going to get into yet the other notes that you can add to these scales. The blue note, the chromatics that you can use inside there to give the scales a lot more color and sound. I'm not going to get into the licks. This is more for improvising. When you write something, you can sit down and use your ear and come up with all kinds of stuff. But yeah, so I hope you found this lesson useful. And I'm going to continue on, and I'm going to go do the Phrygian mode. And I'm going to stick with the key of G. I think it's better that way. Also, the scale charts that I put up, you'll notice that they're color-coded for the root, the third, fifth, and seventh. You can look at them as target notes. So you just don't learn the pattern under, like, for example, D Mixolydian. You're using that same A Dorian pattern, but you'll see that the colors changed. So you want to focus in on those notes when the chord changes to D. Goes back to A, you focus in on the other roots. And you'll notice that a lot of them are the same. Like, for example, if you're playing under A minor 7, well, the A obviously is the root of the A minor 7. And then when it goes to the D7 chord, the A becomes the fifth. There's two notes that are common to each chord. And you'll begin to recognize that after a while. But you won't recognize 5th fret, 1st string, you know, common to an A minor 7 or D7. I don't think you would. I don't know, maybe. I mean, but you'll recognize certain notes that are common to each chord. And it makes it a lot easier. And these things, when you play them, can spark ideas, musical ideas. If you hear a little riff or a sound that you're playing, if you're improvising, you know, you can kind of come up with a whole song off of one riff. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned and check for my next video. If you have any comments, any questions, just leave a comment or question, and I'll answer it the best that I can, or I'll do a video on it. Thanks a lot.